You find yourself bound between two rough-hewn boats in the scorching heat of 401 BC, the wood still wet with river water that now feels like ice against your naked skin. The Persian guards have just finished pouring the mixture, milk and honey, so sweet it makes your stomach lurch down your throat and across your face. The sun beats down mercilessly, and already you can hear them, the first tentative buzzing of flies drawn to the sugary substance coating your features. You try to move, but your head, hands and feet are the only parts of your body that protrude from this wooden prison. Inside, in the darkness between the boats, your body is completely enclosed. You are Mithridates, a soldier of the Persian Empire, and you are about to experience the most horrific punishment ever devised by human imagination. This is Scaphism, the boats, and you will die here, slowly, over the course of 17 agonizing days and nights. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this, and please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The Persian Empire of 401 BC stretched from the Indus River to the Mediterranean Sea, encompassing more territory than any realm before it. At its heart sat Artaxerxes II, king of kings, ruler of millions, commander of armies that could darken the horizon. But even this godlike figure faced challenges that would test the very foundations of his power. His younger brother Cyrus had gathered Greek mercenaries and Persian dissidents, marching against the throne in a bid that would reshape the ancient world. When Cyrus fell at the Battle of Canaxa, struck down not by the king's own hand as Artaxerxes claimed, but by a young soldier named Mithridates, the stage was set for a demonstration of imperial justice so terrible that its memory would haunt human consciousness for over 2 millennia. The origins of Scaphism remain shrouded in the complex web of Persian legal tradition and the harsh realities of maintaining control over a vast empire. The word itself comes from the Greek scaphe, meaning boat, but the practice predates any Greek understanding of Persian culture. In the legal framework of the Achaemenid Empire, punishment served multiple purposes: deterrence, retribution, and the public demonstration of royal power. Death was not merely the end of life, it was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to reinforce the absolute authority of the King of Kings. Ancient Persian law recognized gradations of crime that demanded proportional responses. Common theft might warrant the severing of hands, a mirror punishment that served as both justice and permanent reminder. Adultery could result in the removal of nose and ears, marking the transgressor for life, but certain crimes transcended ordinary categories of wrongdoing. Treason, particularly when it involved the royal family, demanded something more than mere death. It required the complete destruction of the criminal's humanity, a process so thorough and public that it would serve as an eternal warning to potential rebels. Mithridates had committed the ultimate transgression. He had contradicted his king in public. Not only had he killed Cyrus the Younger, the king's brother, but he had dared to claim credit for the deed when Artaxerxes insisted that he, the king, had struck the fatal blow. In Persian court culture, the king's word was divine truth. To contradict it was not merely insubordination, it was an assault on the cosmic order itself. The king could not simply execute Mithridates, he had to demonstrate that challenging royal authority led to consequences worse than death. The process of Scaphism began with careful preparation. 2 boats were selected, carved from sturdy wood and shaped to fit together with precision. These were not crude vessels but carefully crafted instruments of prolonged torture. The boats were designed to trap the victim while allowing access to his vital functions. Holes were cut to accommodate the head, arms and legs, ensuring that these extremities remained exposed to the elements while the torso remained sealed within the wooden prison. The victim was placed on his back in the lower boat, his body positioned so that when the upper boat was secured, only his head, hands and feet would remain visible. Iron bolts or thick ropes bound the 2 halves together, creating a sealed chamber that would become both coffin and breeding ground. The craftsmanship required for this apparatus suggests that Scaphism was not an improvised punishment, but a refined technique, perfected through repeated use. Once secured within the boats, the real torture began. Guards forced the victim to consume food, pricking his eyes with sharp implements if he refused. This feeding served multiple purposes. It kept the victim alive for maximum suffering. It provided material for the inevitable waste that would accumulate within the boats, and it demonstrated the complete helplessness of the condemned. The victim could not even control when or what he ate. Every aspect of his existence was now subject to his executioner's will. After forced feeding came the application of the honey and milk mixture. This substance was poured into the victim's mouth until he nearly choked, then smeared generously across his face, hands, and feet. The sweetness served as an irresistible lure for insects, particularly flies, which would swarm to the exposed flesh. But the honey and milk served another, more sinister purpose. Mixed with the victim's saliva and natural oils, it created a breeding ground for bacterial growth, hastening the onset of infection and decay. The boats were then positioned to ensure maximum sun exposure. The victim's head was secured so that his eyes faced directly into the blazing sun, causing immediate and ongoing damage to his vision. In the scorching heat of Mesopotamia, where temperatures could exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, this positioning alone could cause severe dehydration and sunstroke within hours. But death from exposure was not the goal. Survival was. The victim needed to live long enough for the true horror to unfold. As the sun beat down and the honey attracted ever-increasing numbers of flies, the insects began to deposit eggs in the victim's exposed flesh. The warm, moist environment created by the honey and milk provided ideal conditions for rapid larval development. Within hours, maggots would begin to emerge, feeding on the decaying organic matter and gradually burrowing into the victim's skin. The constant buzzing and movement of insects would drive many victims to madness before the physical torture could kill them. Meanwhile, inside the sealed boats, a different kind of horror was developing. The victim's natural bodily functions continued, but with nowhere for waste to go, urine and feces accumulated in the confined space. The wooden boats trapped heat and moisture, creating a greenhouse effect that accelerated decomposition. Bacteria multiplied rapidly in this warm, humid environment, producing toxins that would gradually poison the victim's bloodstream. The accumulating waste attracted its own ecosystem of vermin. Rats and other scavengers, drawn by the smell, would gnaw at the wooden boats or slip through gaps to feed on the decaying matter. Some accounts describe victims screaming as rats chewed on their exposed feet, adding fresh wounds to the growing catalogue of injuries. The psychological impact of feeling small creatures moving across and through one's body, knowing that they were consuming flesh while the victim remained conscious, represented a form of mental torture, perhaps even more severe than the physical agony. Days passed in this living hell. The victim's exposed skin would blister and burn under the relentless sun, while his internal organs slowly succumbed to bacterial infection. Dehydration would cause the lips to crack and the tongue to swell, making even the forced drinking of honey and milk an agony. The constant exposure to his own waste would cause chemical burns on the lower portion of his body, while the upper extremities suffered from sunburn so severe that the skin would begin to slough off in sheets. By the end of the first week, most victims would have lost the ability to speak coherently, their minds destroyed by pain, dehydration, and the toxic effects of systemic infection. Yet their bodies, sustained by the enforced feeding and the honey mixture, would continue to cling to life. The human organism's stubborn refusal to die, even under the most extreme conditions, was essential to the punishment's effectiveness. Death had to be slow enough and public enough to serve its deterrent purpose. The crowds that gathered to witness Scaphism were as much a part of the punishment as the physical torture itself. Royal justice was always performed before an audience, and executions drew spectators from across the empire. Merchants would interrupt their trading, farmers would leave their fields, and entire families would bring food and make day-long expeditions to witness the spectacle. The victim's suffering was not private but communal, a shared experience that reinforced social hierarchy and the consequences of challenging authority. Spectators would often comment on the progression of the victim's decay, noting changes in his appearance and behavior from day to day. Some brought offerings to the gods, praying either for the victim's swift death or for divine protection from similar punishment. Others came purely for entertainment, viewing the prolonged execution as a form of macabre theatre. The reaction of the crowd was carefully observed by royal officials, who could gauge public mood and the effectiveness of their deterrent measures by watching how people responded to the spectacle. Religious officials played a complex role in these proceedings. While Scaphism was a secular punishment imposed by royal authority, it took place within a culture deeply influenced by Zoroastrian concepts of purity and contamination. The victim's gradual corruption represented not just physical decay, but spiritual pollution, a visible manifestation of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Some religious authorities viewed the punishment as a necessary purification, cleansing the empire of treachery and rebellion. Others worried that the deliberate cultivation of decay and suffering might anger the gods and bring misfortune upon the kingdom. The technological aspects of Scaphism reveal sophisticated understanding of both human physiology and the natural processes of decomposition. The punishment was designed to maximize suffering while preventing premature death, requiring careful calibration of multiple variables. The boats had to be tight enough to prevent escape, but loose enough to allow circulation of air and the movement of insects. The feeding schedule had to provide sufficient nutrition to sustain life without allowing the victim to build strength. The positioning had to balance sun exposure for insect attraction against the risk of fatal heat stroke. Persian executioners developed expertise in managing these complex requirements, passing down their knowledge through generations of royal service. They learned to recognize the signs of imminent death and to adjust the treatment accordingly, sometimes providing shade during the hottest part of the day or increasing fluid intake when dehydration threatened to end the punishment prematurely. This was not random cruelty but systematic torture, refined through practice and observation into a precise instrument of state terror. The psychological dimensions of Scaphism extended far beyond the individual victim. Word of the punishment spread throughout the empire, creating a climate of fear that made open rebellion almost unthinkable. Soldiers who might have considered defection recalled the fate of Mithridates and chose loyalty instead. Satraps who harbored dreams of independence remembered the 17 days of agony and remained faithful to the crown. The punishment of one man served to control millions, a calculus that Persian administrators understood and exploited with ruthless efficiency. For those forced to witness Scaphism, the experience created lasting trauma that further reinforced imperial authority. Children who saw the boats would grow up with vivid memories of what happened to those who challenged the king. Adults would carry the images of decay and suffering for the rest of their lives, sharing their experiences with family and friends, and thereby spreading the psychological impact of the punishment far beyond its immediate audience. Royal justice was designed to be unforgettable, and Scaphism succeeded in creating memories that would persist across generations. The logistical challenges of maintaining a victim for 17 days required significant resources and organization. Guards had to work in shifts to provide constant supervision, preventing rescue attempts, and ensuring that the feeding schedule was maintained. Supplies of honey, milk, and food had to be procured and transported to the execution site. Officials had to manage the crowds, maintaining order while ensuring maximum visibility of the punishment. The apparatus itself required maintenance, with craftsmen standing by to repair any damage to the boats that might allow premature escape through death. Medical knowledge played a paradoxical role in the administration of Scaphism. Palace physicians, despite their oath to preserve life, were sometimes consulted on techniques for prolonging the victim's survival. They might recommend specific feeding schedules, suggest treatments for preventing fatal complications, or advise on the optimal positioning of the boats to balance various competing factors. This involvement of healers in the machinery of death represents one of the most morally complex aspects of the entire system. The international implications of Scaphism extended far beyond Persia's borders. Foreign ambassadors who witnessed the punishment returned to their own courts with detailed descriptions of Persian justice, influencing diplomatic relations and military planning. Some allied kingdoms adopted similar techniques, viewing extreme punishment as a mark of sophisticated governance. Others recoiled in horror, using Persian cruelty as justification for forming defensive alliances or launching preemptive wars. Greek mercenaries who survived the Battle of Cunaxa and witnessed its aftermath carried stories of Scaphism back to their home cities, where the accounts influenced philosophical discussions about justice, power, and the nature of tyranny. Playwrights incorporated elements of the punishment into tragic dramas, while historians debated its effectiveness as a deterrent versus its moral implications. The punishment became a symbol of Oriental despotism, contrasted with supposedly more humane Greek concepts of justice. Economic factors also influenced the use of Scaphism. The punishment was expensive, requiring significant investment of time, personnel, and materials for maximum effect. It was therefore reserved for crimes of particular significance, typically those involving threats to royal authority or family. Common criminals might face swift execution, mutilation, or slavery, but Scaphism was reserved for cases where the king needed to make a statement that would resonate throughout the empire. The cost was justified by the political benefits of creating lasting fear and obedience. The seasonal timing of executions by Scaphism was carefully considered. Summer months provided optimal conditions for insect activity and rapid decomposition, while winter executions might fail to achieve the desired effect due to reduced bug populations and slower bacterial growth. Royal officials would sometimes delay major executions until weather conditions were favorable, building public anticipation and anxiety while ensuring maximum impact when the punishment was finally administered. Regional variations in the implementation of Scaphism reflected local conditions and administrative preferences. In desert provinces, the boats might be positioned to take advantage of sandstorms that would flay exposed flesh while depositing irritating particles in the victim's eyes and mouth. In river valleys, the boats might be partially submerged to attract aquatic insects and increase humidity, Coastal regions could incorporate salt water into the honey mixture, creating additional chemical burns while preserving the flesh against premature decomposition. The selection of victims for Scaphism involved careful political calculation. The punishment was most effective when applied to individuals of high status, whose fall from grace would shock and intimidate the population. Executing common soldiers by Scaphism might be wasteful, while subjecting nobles or royal relatives to the punishment would demonstrate that no one was beyond the reach of imperial justice. The king's decision to condemn Mithridates, a relatively minor figure who had performed valuable service in killing Cyrus, sent a clear message that even heroism could not excuse disobedience. Documentation and record-keeping played important roles in the administration of Scaphism. Royal scribes maintained detailed accounts of executions, noting the victim's crime, the duration of the punishment, public reaction, and administrative costs. These records served multiple purposes. They provided data for evaluating the punishment's effectiveness, they created legal precedents for future cases, and they preserved the memory of royal justice for future generations. The bureaucracy of death was as thorough and systematic as any other aspect of Persian administration. The role of family members in Scaphism executions added another layer of psychological torment to the proceedings. Relatives of the condemned were sometimes forced to witness the punishment, sharing in the victim's humiliation and serving as additional examples to the population. In other cases, family members were forbidden from approaching the execution site, denied even the comfort of saying farewell, or the eventual relief of retrieving the body for burial. The punishment thus extended beyond the individual to encompass entire family networks, creating collective trauma that reinforced social control. Female victims of Scaphism faced additional horrors specific to their gender. Pregnancy might delay execution until after childbirth, but would not prevent it entirely. The exposure of women's bodies to public view violated cultural norms of modesty, adding shame to physical suffering. Sexual violence during the extended period of helplessness was a constant threat, though official records rarely acknowledge such incidents. The rare cases of women subjected to Scaphism were particularly effective in terrorizing the female population and reinforcing gender hierarchies within the imperial system. The aftermath of Scaphism executions required careful management to maximize their deterrent effect. Bodies were typically left exposed for additional days after death, allowing complete decomposition and serving as a final warning to potential rebels. The remains might then be burned, scattered, or buried in unmarked graves, denying the victims any possibility of memorial or martyrdom. Personal possessions were confiscated and redistributed, erasing all traces of the condemned person's existence, except for the memory of their suffering. Artistic representations of Scaphism began appearing in various media throughout the Persian Empire and beyond. Palace artists created detailed paintings and reliefs depicting the punishment, serving both as decoration and as subtle reminders of royal power. Craftsmen produced miniature models of the boats as toys or religious objects, familiarizing children with the concept from an early age. Literary works incorporated descriptions of Scaphism into epic poems and historical narratives, ensuring that knowledge of the punishment would survive even if the practice itself was abandoned. The training of executioners responsible for administering Scaphism required years of apprenticeship and specialized knowledge. Master executioners passed down techniques for maintaining optimal conditions, recognizing medical emergencies, managing crowds, and coordinating complex logistical operations. These specialists were both feared and respected within Persian society, wielding enormous power while remaining forever associated with death and suffering. Their expertise was considered a state secret, protected from foreign intelligence, and carefully regulated by royal authority. Resistance to Scaphism occasionally emerged from various quarters within the empire. Some regional governors questioned the necessity of such extreme measures, arguing that swift execution was equally effective as a deterrent while requiring fewer resources. Religious leaders sometimes objected to the deliberate cultivation of impurity and decay, viewing it as potentially offensive to divine authority. Military commanders worried that excessive cruelty might provoke rebellion rather than preventing it, especially among foreign auxiliary forces who might not share Persian cultural values. The technological evolution of Scaphism reflected broader changes in Persian society and administration. Early versions of the punishment might have used crude boats or improvised restraints, but by the time of Artaxerxes II, the system had been refined into a precise instrument of royal justice. Innovations in boat construction, feeding techniques, and crowd management represented investments in the machinery of state terror, designed to maintain imperial control through fear and spectacle. International diplomatic consequences of Scaphism executions sometimes complicated Persian foreign policy. Allied kingdoms might protest the treatment of their citizens, leading to negotiations over extradition and punishment procedures. Enemy states used Persian cruelty as propaganda, rallying their populations against the barbarous empire. Neutral powers might adjust their diplomatic strategies based on their assessment of Persian willingness to use extreme measures, viewing Scaphism as evidence of either strength or instability. The legal framework surrounding Scaphism required careful definition of qualifying crimes and proper procedures for condemnation. Royal judges developed expertise in determining when the punishment was appropriate, balancing the need for deterrence against the risk of appearing arbitrary or excessive. Appeal procedures existed in theory, though in practice few condemned individuals possessed the influence necessary to overturn a royal death sentence. The legal process served to legitimize the punishment while maintaining the appearance of rational justice. Medical observations of Scaphism victims provided valuable data about human physiology and the progression of various diseases. Palace physicians documented the stages of decomposition, the effects of prolonged sun exposure, and the body's response to extreme stress and deprivation. This knowledge, while gained through horrific means, contributed to broader understanding of medicine and anatomy. Some physicians may have used their observations to develop treatments for similar conditions encountered in more conventional medical practice. The psychological profile of individuals selected for Scaphism punishment reveals patterns in Persian concepts of crime and justice. Victims were typically characterized by pride, defiance, or excessive ambition, traits that threatened the social order by encouraging others to challenge authority. The punishment was designed not just to kill but to humble, reducing the victim from a figure of potential inspiration to an object of pity and revulsion. The complete destruction of human dignity was as important as the destruction of human life. Environmental factors played crucial roles in the effectiveness of Scaphism executions. Climate, geography, and seasonal conditions all influenced the progression of the punishment and its impact on observers. Persian administrators became expert at selecting optimal locations and timing for maximum effect, considering factors such as wind patterns, insect populations, and public accessibility. The execution site itself became a crucial component of the punishment, carefully chosen to enhance the spectacle and ensure lasting memories. Economic analysis of Scaphism reveals the significant investment required for maximum effectiveness. Beyond the immediate costs of materials and personnel, the punishment demanded ongoing resource allocation for maintenance, security, and administration. The economic burden was justified by the deterrent effect, which presumably reduced the costs of maintaining internal security through military force. From a cost-benefit perspective, the torture of one individual was considered preferable to the suppression of widespread rebellion. The social hierarchy within the execution apparatus reflected broader patterns of Persian society. High-ranking officials made policy decisions about when and how to use Scaphism, while lower-level administrators handled logistics and crowd control. Skilled craftsmen built the boats and maintained the equipment, while guards provided security and implemented the physical aspects of the punishment. Even within the machinery of death, social distinctions were carefully maintained and reinforced. Religious interpretations of Scaphism varied widely throughout the Persian Empire's diverse population. Zoroastrian priests might view the punishment as a necessary cleansing of evil, while followers of other faiths could see it as evidence of Persian impiety. Local religious traditions were sometimes incorporated into the execution rituals, adding cultural specificity to the imperial practice. The religious dimension of the punishment contributed to its psychological impact while creating additional complications for imperial administration. The ultimate fate of Mithridates, the young soldier whose boast led to his condemnation, illustrates the terrible calculus of imperial justice. His 17 days of agony served purposes far beyond simple revenge. They demonstrated royal power, deterred future rebellion, provided entertainment for the masses, and created lasting memories that would influence behavior throughout the empire. One man's suffering became a tool of governance, a message written in flesh and blood for all to read and remember. As the sun set on the 17th day, Mithridates finally died. His body, consumed by maggots and rotted by his own waste, bore little resemblance to the proud soldier who had struck down a prince. The boats were opened to reveal the ultimate horror: flesh eaten away, bones exposed, a human being transformed into something barely recognizable as once alive. The crowd gasped and recoiled, but they would never forget what they had seen. Artaxerxes had made his point. The legacy of Scaphism extends far beyond ancient Persia, representing humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty in service of political power. While the specific practice may have died with the empire that created it, the underlying logic that extreme punishment can serve as an instrument of control remains disturbingly relevant. Modern states may lack the Persian Empire's appetite for public spectacle, But the fundamental equation of fear and obedience continues to shape political relationships across the globe. In our contemporary world, we find echoes of Scaphism's logic in various forms of state-sponsored violence, though typically hidden from public view rather than celebrated as royal justice. The calculation remains the same: make an example of one to control many, use extreme suffering to prevent challenge, and demonstrate that authority will use any means necessary to maintain itself. The boats may be gone, but the mentality that created them persists wherever power feels threatened and chooses to respond with disproportionate force. Today, as you go about your daily life, remember Mithridates. Remember the young soldier who killed a prince and boasted of it, only to discover that truth itself could be a crime when it contradicted royal power. His 17 days between those rotting boats remind us that the human capacity for both cruelty and endurance knows no limits, and that the price of challenging authority has sometimes been measured not in mere death, but in the complete destruction of everything that makes us human.